Welcome to Conversations for Our Time with the Quiet Sun team, John and George. This is podcast number 38, I believe. So we're zooming through them. It's pretty amazing. We've done a few mini series. We're considering putting this into a mini series, and really kind of diving deep into the I suppose, we can describe this as the natural laws of nature. And she's always showing us something. And this week, what we're actually going to be talking about is cycles and patterns. Now, this is something I've been looking into and researching and observing really since I've been growing food, but certainly in the last kind of 3 years. And, these cycles and patterns are something we can observe from the microcosm all the way up to the macrocosm. And we find that they're actually, they can be scaled up. So there are a number of patterns in life, in nature. And we're probably talking about 15 main patterns. And you can observe these in natural phenomena. We can also observe them in the human body. And most interestingly, we can observe them in human behavior and society. And one example of this is like the dendritic pattern. We kind of touched on this last podcast. So a dendritic pattern is where it has a start and it branches off. And each one of those branches off again. So this can be known, as a one of these things that is infinite. So we can think of this as a thought. So we have a thought, and the thought basically turns into lots of different thoughts, which go off in all different directions. So, this is the reason I'm saying this is because when we become observers of our mind, we can see where the mind goes, and it creates these different patterns. We've heard of the expression is like spiraling out of control. Well, a spiral is a natural pattern, but it's also, you can relate it to human behavior. So it's a really interesting subject. I know George has got his own kind of perspective on it as well. So I would just like to start by just sharing the different types of patterns that are out there, just to see if anyone listening would like to kind of observe these and discover these. So patterns all have a shape. They have a distinctive shape, and they're distinctive to themselves. Also, these patterns can interact with each other. So some of the patterns we have is the branching or dendritic pattern, which is a river system, it's a tree, it's our veins, it's roots of a tree, mycelium. They're all based on this dendritic pattern. Then we have pulsing patterns. The pulsing can be waves, the winds, tides, heartbeats, and even things that are slightly more damaging to us, like Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a pulsing pattern. Then we have scattering. So from wind to water, the drift of, and this can be related to the pulsing pattern. So it's spread by the pulsing stimuli of debris. So we've all seen this when something blows across the ground on a windy day. That's a scattering pattern. Then we have a wave, and this is actually created by the pulsing pattern. And this creates a flow between two media, like waves in water or sand. Then streamlines, these are something that's a lot slower, and you see streamlines in very windy places, like in the deserts of Arizona in America. You see this pattern on rocks. So over millions of years, as the wind has just kind of degraded those rocks, and you kind of see this pattern, so you can actually kind of see the way the wind is blowing, which is really cool. And one of my favorites is the matrix. So these, you can actually see these in the microcosm as well. You get this in structured water, these matrices. And the best example would be a honeycomb. So if you ever see a honeycomb from bees, that's a matrix. You can also see it in sweet corn, and snake scales. So it's like, you know, if you start thinking about it, you start thinking, wow, like, you know, you can actually see these everywhere. And then we have cloud forms. So a cloud form is obviously a cloud, but also a mushroom. Mushrooms have that type of, a lot of mushrooms have that type of cloud form, and also the crown of a tree. So if you look at a lot of trees, they look like a cloud. And then we mentioned about spirals. Um, we can see these in sunflowers, in galaxies, in whirlpools. And then you have things like lobes. So these are the rounded edges of reefs. Now, one more thing I'd just like to mention just before I hand over to George is around each pattern, you have the edge. So the edge of something. Okay. So if we take a river, for instance, you have the dendritic pattern, but in that dendritic pattern, you have the edges. And it's these edges of patterns where there is an interaction between two media. So the river itself, but also the land surrounding the river. And what you tend to find in these places is this is where all the life, all the energy is actually interacting. So it's a very powerful place. And we can again apply this to our life. When we display particular patterns, at the edge of that pattern is where all the energy is. So if we're creating patterns that are destructive, we're actually giving our energy away. If we're creating patterns that are effective and creative, we're actually drawing the energy towards us, and sharing that energy out, of course. But the important thing is just, patterns aren't necessarily good or bad in the context of nature, but when you apply it to the human psyche or emotions, etc., they can be, because obviously we bring the human element into it. So that's about patterns. Cycles are a lot easier. We can see the cycles of the seasons, of day and night, light and dark, of the moon. You know, there's loads and loads of different cycles. A woman's cycle, you know, her menstrual cycle. So there's lots of these things, and even the cycles can then kind of, we can see these in human behavior. So when we get into a cycle of depression, for instance, which I've struggled with a lot in my life, it's very difficult to get out of that cycle until you create a new cycle, because cycles are so indicative and you know, profoundly connected to all of life. We have to be in a cycle. Nothing is linear in life. There's a cycle to everything. And some of them are massive, like the cycles of the sun, and some of them are small, like our daily cycles. You know, we wake up, you know, we get on with our day, we wind down, we go to sleep, and we rest. So it's such a fascinating subject, and actually we can delve really deeply into this and go off in lots of different directions. But I hope that kind of you know, tantalizes people's kind of interest in looking at this, because once we do, especially if we want to do something like grow food, knowing the cycles and patterns of nature is really going to help us. And even doing things like the work that George is doing in spiritual life coaching, you know, we're we're focusing on these patterns of behavior and these cycles, because if we don't recognize them within ourselves, um, we are not the witness. We can't possibly influence or transform how we think or feel about something unless we see those patterns and cycles. So I'm sure you'd agree on that, George. And maybe you can just share your experience and what your kind of your perspective on it.
Yeah, cheers, John. That's a great introduction of today's podcast. I do hope everyone can hear me okay very well. I am actually on the beach doing this podcast because it was the best place I could actually do it. It's not always easy to do it in hostels, but I'm hoping to start to stay in hotels soon, so I'll have more space to myself. But yeah, no, totally agree with absolutely everything you're saying, John. And the key word we're looking here is beautiful. It is totally beautiful what nature is trying to show us. Yeah, there are many aspects of nature, and we can delve into any aspect of it, and you'll find an abundance of information. And this is what we've been doing throughout our podcasts, in the mini series and whatever subject we go into, the grand solar minimum. It's endless, and that's the thing. It is endless. And when we learn about this stuff, when we're learning about nature, we're reconnecting with ourselves because this is exactly what she wants. She wants us to bring her into our lives in absolutely everything we do because we cannot live without nature. If we try to, then it's a discord, it's a disconnection, and we suffer. But it's an unfolding story. Everything you're talking about, John, there is an unfolding story that nature is telling us. Yeah. And it all goes back to balance. Everything about this realm that we live in, realm is real Mother Earth. And that's what it is. It's all about balance. It's all about recognizing, especially in the work that I do, spiritual life coaching, is recognizing those patterns. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head there, right on the head. It's recognizing these patterns outside of us. When you recognize the patterns that are going on outside of us, it's also happening within us. In the eyes of the source, there's no good pattern or bad pattern. We only feel it. We only feel it when the negative patterns are within us. And that creates conflict. That creates suffering. And as you know more than the next guy, anyone who studies Buddhism, John, we do create our own suffering. And that is the bitter pill that we have to swallow. We do create our own suffering. And it comes out and it shows on the outside of us. Yeah, we have wounds and we will attract those wounds in our lives with other people. And it's an unfolding story. A painful situation would have come from a wound from within us. And the story that life and nature is playing out, is playing out is an unfolding story, and there's a lesson there, a lesson within a lesson, within a lesson, within a lesson, within one big, massive lesson. So we need to recognize our patterns within nature, all the beautiful things that are going on in nature, yeah, and all the negative things that are going on, the chaotic things. It's coming from us. We're the one that fell. We are the ones that fell. We're the ones that went out of balance, and nature is telling us, look at me. She's saying, look at me. I always go back into balance, no matter what you humans do, and no matter what you humans chuck at me. She's saying, I'm going to go back to balance, and I'm going to be here long before, when you go, I'm going to stay here. That's what nature is saying. And it's all connected to astrology, which is what I'm going to be going into. I'm going to be talking about astrology, correcting the moon cycle and correcting the sun cycle. Yeah. That has a direct effect on us. It's all to do with nature. It's all to do with understanding nature. What is she trying to tell us? Yeah. And I'm going to go more into cycles because I just think I'm glad you spoke more about patterns. I'm going to go into cycles. So And what are cycles? Yeah, what is the meaning of a cycle? What does nature, why does nature have them? Yeah, these are all beautiful questions that we can contemplate wherever you are. You can do it in your room, you can do it in your back garden, I can do it on the beach. You know, why does nature have these patterns? Um, the dictionary definition of a cycle is a series of events that are regularly repeated in the same order. And there are cycles within cycles within cycles, as you said, John, within cycles that are always within a bigger cycle, especially within astrology, because it's all astrology. It ties with life and everything that we do, absolutely everything that we do, and every aspect within us, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And when one is out of whack, it doesn't matter which one, when one of those four things are out of whack, the whole lot goes out of whack. And this is why the law of rhythm and one of the principles of natural law is so important, because in these hard times, which I'm going to go into a little bit further, but in these hard times, we need to find that rhythm and we need to find that balance even more so right now. I've said that before, you know, because there are even tougher times ahead of us, and I don't like to say it, but we have to be realistic as well. So especially within astrology, let's break down the word cycle. That's the first thing I would do. And you know me, John, this is what I do. And here's the allegory. Yeah. We can ride a bike, yeah, or what is also called a cycle. We ride a cycle, it's a bike. What we need to do is ride these cycles out. We need to ride these cycles out, especially the tough ones that are happening now. We're not so badly affected in the Western world when it comes to the grand solar minimum, but certainly other aspects of the world is hitting a hard time when it comes to growing food. And overall, as a society, we have had it bad for the last 2,000 years, yeah, in the age of Pisces. But there's so much beauty that has come out of that the last 2,000 years. And we need to learn that beauty, especially in the Bible and the allegorical stories of the Bible, where we need to ride out these cycles. That's the allegory. So in Latin, it's cyclus, yeah, and in Greek, it's kuklos. That's what the word cycle means. They both mean circle. You can see the connection now. This is what a cycle is. It goes round in a circle. It all goes round in a circle. Your patterns, your suffering, your joy, your peace, your everything. It's all going out it's going around in the circles. But if you really
Lost you, George. Hello, George.
Yeah, you just went there for a second, John. I can hear you now.
Yeah, cool. Carry
Did
on,
you
mate.
did you manage to get everything I've said there?
Well, I don't. Yeah, no. You. If you want to repeat the last like couple of minutes,
Did you get did you get the part where I broke down the word cycle in Latin?
I got the bit where you talked about what Latin and Greek is in cycle, and then you cut
Oh,
out.
that's oh, okay. I do apologise for that. I'll just finish that last little bit. So that in Latin, the word cycle is cyclus, and in Greek it's kuklos. They both mean circle. So this is what a cycle is. It goes round in a circle. Yeah. Um, and even it goes even more deeper than that. If you phonetically listen to the word cycle, if you know, it is saying psych all, right? It means mind all. All is the mind, which is the first principle of natural law. The universe is mental. Everything is happening in the mind, which is the cycle of the mind. Everything happens in the mind. And it's so profound when you even break down the word cycle. You look at the root meaning and you're breaking down the code within the word of the word cycle. I'm sure you'll agree. It's proper fascinating, John.
Yeah, it really is, George. Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, these, I've thought, well, I've been observing cycles for a while now, and we've both looked into this kind of macrocosmic, cyclical nature, and you cannot separate any of the cycles outside of us to the cycles inside of us. And it's very interesting, you know, that so many people are disconnected from this cyclical nature. In fact, I did a workshop last night. It's called Grow Your Own. So it's something I do with an organization called the PFFA. And I thought it'd be, really beneficial to kind of bring in this element of, when we live with the seasons of our country, we actually start deeply connecting with nature. And our ancestors would have done this. And the greatest thing about when you do this is you learn to adapt very quickly. And it becomes almost like first nature just to be in rhythm with nature. So we're now heading into a time where we're ending one cycle and we're going to be beginning the next. And some people call this the age of Aquarius. It's going to take some time to transition into that. But actually, if we actually look at our civilization, if we can call it that, there's a lot of things that are coming to an end. And there's potential new cycles. There's alternatives, right? We've got this cycle of deep materialism. Rudolf Steiner talked about this when we kind of descend into these Ahrimanic forces. So this new cycle of AI and disconnection from nature. But that doesn't mean that the cycles of nature stop. It just means that we're disconnected. So we get, the reason I'm bringing this up is we get to choose every day what cycle we live in, and as you talked about this kind of, the mental aspect of the word cycle. So we get to choose if we want to create cycles that are destructive, are unhealthy, and, against the natural law, or we choose ones that are probably a lot more difficult to uphold because it takes mindfulness, and we actually have to get out of our mind literally, because the more we're in our mind, the more we mechanize stuff. So, a lot of these ancients talked about the mind, but what they weren't talking about the brain, they were talking about the whole being. So actually, we need to be more in touch with our bodies and feeling rather than thinking about what this is and what that is. Because it's like when you, I do this fairly often, but I remember my first experience of grounding with my plum tree on my allotment. I took my shoes and socks off and I put my hand on the trunk and I could just feel this energy cycling through the tree, my hand into the tree, and I could feel it coming up through my feet, and I could just feel this tingling in my body, and that's a way, rather than thinking, oh, this plum tree looks amazing, look at it, oh, it's got these beautiful branches, that's one way of looking at it. But actually, when we shift our perspective from the mind to the heart, we start to create these new cycles, and we've probably, if we go into ourselves, we can recall these experiences where we create these cycles in our mind that aren't real, right? So you might think that someone doesn't like you, but you've got no evidence for it. But it's a cycle you've created through this disconnection to yourself and nature. Because when we're truly connected to nature, we don't have these invasive, interrupting, parasitic thoughts, because they're of no use to us. You go out to these tribes, there's very few of them, but some of these tribes still exist in places like Papua New Guinea, certain areas in Africa and South America. They have no worries. They don't have any issues. They don't have any mental trauma. None of that exists. It is, it's purely based on how they interact with nature, and they're so attuned to it that nothing becomes, they're not out of balance. You talked about balance, George. So I think, from my own experience, I've had to really stop being so hard on myself, because the more we scrutinize ourselves, and the more we try to grab hold of these things that we think are going to make us feel better, the less we actually are feeling, and sometimes we have to feel the pain, because if we don't feel the pain, how are we going to get out of the cycle? If we're not aware of it and sit with it, we can't, there's no point going, oh, if only I'd have done this, or if I'd have done that, things would have been better. Well, no, that's, in my opinion, that's not how life works. We have to go through this and learn through the experience. So it's such a fascinating subject, George, full of, um, everyone can have a different perspective on this. That's what I'm trying to say. And everyone's got an experience. And I think when we become aware of these patterns and cycles, we actually start to free ourselves, because we can start to see them, and which ones are helpful and healthy and which ones are destructive. So is there anything else you'd like to add, George?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've still got 9 minutes, I believe. So I'm just going to add to what you're saying there, and I think it's a good way to end. And I make sure you've got enough time to end it. But you're absolutely correct. It's all, we have to balance the mind first, okay? And we have to. I know there's a bit of background noise, and I do apologise. That's going to go in a second. But we have to balance that brain first. That's the first thing. We have to have an understanding of what nature is all about and telling us. And when we do, we get to use our heart more. And this is where we need to operate from. We need to operate from the heart. So we need an understanding first of this reality that we live in. And I have a different perspective. Here's a wacky one. I don't think there's any such thing as a second, a minute, an hour, a day, a week, a fortnight, a month, a year, a decade, a century, or a millennium. They are all human constructs that man has created to give us a 3D understanding of it all. All they are is a repeated cycle. And that's the nature way of looking at it. That is the nature way of looking at it. We have to stop looking at it and it's too much as a human perspective, and actually look at it for what, in the eyes of source, sometimes, to have a true understanding of it. So we have these cycles from a day to the seasons to the astrological ages, like the ending of a 2,100 year cycle, like you were talking about, the cycle of Pisces going into the new age of Aquarius. The Bible is talking about this. The Bible is talking about the end times. The end times. It's got nothing to do with actually the end times. It is talking about the astrological age of Pisces coming to an end and us going into the new age of Aquarius. That's what it is. And unfortunately, people have taken that on board as literally as the dangers of religion. This is the dangers of religion. We need to look at the allegorical story within it, as we need to do as the allegorical story in life, and see what life is unfolding and telling us a story. But it's all an astrological age. So all from, you've got the precession of the equinox, or the great year, or the Platonic year of 26,000 years. All of these cycles, from the day, the seasons, from the Platonic year, going into the 4 Yuga cycles, the world ages in Hinduism. We're talking massive, massive astrological cycles, to small cycles to massive ones. And we've got each Yuga cycle lasting 4,320,000 years, with its 4 Yuga cycles, which equals to 12,000 divine years. The anagram of divine is dive in. We need to dive in this information, this age of information, and we need to learn these cycles. Because I'm not saying people who are listening to this podcast don't, but there are some that don't understand these cycles. So a divine year lasts for 360 solar or human years. Okay, and we've got the Krita or the Satya Yuga, which lasts for 1,729,000 years, which is 4,800 divine years. And then you've got the Treta Yuga, which lasts for 1,296,000 years, which is 3,600 divine years. Yeah, you've got the Dvapara Yuga, which is 864,000 years, which is 2,400 divine years. And then you've got the Kali Yuga being the 432,000 years, which is 1,200 divine years. So this is the current Yuga, believed to be in the age of conflict and sin. And I wanted to mention that because we are in the age of conflict and sin. There's so much conflict that's been going on within us. We need to ride these cycles out. Yeah. We are talking massive cycles of time, John. They all affect how we live, how we live our lives here on earth. Yeah. How we interact with one another, how we grow and evolve with each other, how we grow food, essentially, and how our ancestors were warning us about these cycles of time, John. So we really need to get in connection with the cycles of astrology, because it has everything to do with life, and I'm sure you'll agree with that, John.
Yeah, again, George, it's this the microcosm is the macrocosm. It's just a scaled up version of it. Yeah, and it's what you mentioned about sin, and I think that needs to be cleared up, because the kind of the mainstream idea of sin is evil, but that's actually a misinterpretation of what sin is. We can call sin fundamental darkness. So in Buddhism, they talk about fundamental darkness, and that fundamental darkness is actually ignorance. So sin is ignorance. It's ignorance to the greatness or the beauty of life, and the beauty that whether you want to call it God, Buddha, source, but it rests within us. It permeates our entire being. And when we don't see that, we are in sin. And that's what causes this, the age of the Kali Yuga, is the age of conflict, is the reason we have conflict in our society is because there's conflict within each human being. Each human being is not aligned and balanced with the natural laws of life. And this is where sin comes from. Because I think a lot of people hear that word sin and they kind of get switched off because they think of like, oh, you know, bless you, child, you have sinned, but now you're forgiven type of thing. So I thought that'd be worth mentioning right at the end. We are going to be drawing to a close now. Sorry about that interruption halfway in between, but either mine or George's internet dropped out. So fantastic podcast. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone out there is enjoying it. I think, you know, me and George have got something quite cool going on here. We're covering lots of different subjects. And, you know, please share this with people because this isn't about us. I don't care about building an audience. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. But I would like to spread this knowledge out there so people can start looking into it, researching it, experiencing it, and living these beautiful ways of looking at things. So thank you. George has just messaged me saying, wrap it up, wrap it up. Yeah, so thank you very much, everyone. It's I hope this rests with you well. Enjoy the rest of your week wherever you are, and I hope the sun is still shining on you. And we'll chat to you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Pond 5.